Well, hope everybody's doing okay this evening, Thursday, July 16th. It's another beautiful, beautiful day in South Carolina just to be alive and being able to move forward in this direction of truth and the ability to recognize who we are and so forth. So I hope everybody can hear me okay and things of that nature. So give me a good hello out there and let me make sure we got everything taken care of here on our Zoom as we get moving forward and audio options. Make sure we're doing good there. Okay, looks like everybody's on. All right. Well, as everybody knows, it's middle of July. We got a big talk tonight dealing with Mr. Trump on all sorts of good things. I'm feeling it good. I'm thinking that there's going to be some areas there that most of us are unaware of. So let's be positive. I believe that's at 9 o'clock Eastern time on broadcast on YouTube there. And so hopefully everybody can attend that and so forth. So tonight we're going to be talking about the hierarchy of laws. And so let me go ahead and get my file up and running, and then that way we can go ahead and get things shared. Going to be leaving the screen here in just a second. And so we'll be moving that up and coming here to this. And so hopefully all of you out there can see what I'm doing here. And show meeting. Okay, and get over here. Got Miss Chat. So, all right. So, ninthamendmentparty.com and God we trust. This presentation's 55 pages long, people. So, just so you know, it's going to be on our Ninth Amendment Party website.com, and you'll be able to download a PDF file in case you ever have to go back. And as well, this will also be recorded. So, it will be on the Rumble and YouTube channels. So, let me go ahead and see if I can get that taken care of here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go to page 2. Let me get all this stuff kind of out of my way here. I got a bunch of stuff here in my way. Get that moved out of my way. Get this moved. Get that moved back down. You know, there's a lot of movement a person has to do for this thing here. So anyhow, let's go ahead and see where we're at here. All right. All right. The United States does not have a single body of law. Instead, it has a hierarchy of legal authority, and it's spread across the federal, state, county, cities, known as a municipality, slash commercial. Presently, today, as I've mentioned before, all city, county, state, and federal government is all working under the commercial structure. Okay, that's the all caps. Each level has a different power, different methods, and enactment in different geographical jurisdictions. So the hierarchy from the highest authority to the lowest. And again, like I said, you'll be able to pull this PDF file on the ninthamendmentparty.com, where the truth will set you free. Okay, so as we move forward on this area here, we also have the U.S. Constitution, we have federal statutes, we have treaties, federal regulations, executive orders, federal case law, state constitution, state statutes, state administrative regulations, county ordinances, city ordinances, and then also the aspect of commercial type overview. Okay. And so we're going to be looking at the Constitution, and it applies to the entire US. The federal statutes apply to the entire US. The treaties apply to the entire US. Okay. Now, within those three, the Constitution can be amended. The Constitution or a later statute, when it comes to the federal statutes, acts of Congress, overrule, as well as the Constitution overrules treaties. Okay. And as an American Indian, I can tell you that's one of the biggest reasons why we've had difficulty within maintaining our treaties, is because it allows the federal government to break treaties within that aspect. Now, federal regulations, okay, the Constitution and statutes and courts can overturn those regulations. Executive orders, this applies to exactly the executive branch. As you know, Mr. Trump's gone through a lot of different areas there that have had difficulty and has had to go to court and win those particular cases. And so it can be overturned by the Constitution, statutes, later presidents, as well as the courts. Federal case law, it's nationwide or within the circuit. Just like when we help assist Naples, Florida, Collier County, in the aspect of taking the pride parades out in the public and moving those events into a private arena. And so that is federal case law, which can be utilized in every state. State constitutions, okay, that applies to that individual state, and it can be overruled by the U.S. Constitution. So if there's something in your state constitution that violates the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Constitution always shall trump the state constitutions. Now, state statutes, okay, they're an individual state. So you might have a law in Washington and a law in South Carolina, and they might be different laws, and they could be the same laws, but with different consequences. And so the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution within those aspects are the only way to overrun or overrule a state statute. Now, when we look at state administrative regulations, individual states, okay, so again, when we look at the Chevron case, which was overturned, allowing judges to utilize agencies as a discretion to determine the law, that no longer exists. And so within those state administrative regulations, state statutes and the Constitution override those particular administrative rulemakings. County ordinances, they have to go with the state law, and they can't violate the Constitution as well. City ordinances are the same within the state law and the county law. And then again, regulations have to deal with internal procedures, and all U.S. constitutions, federal statutes, treaties, regulations, executive orders, federal case law, state constitutions, state statutes, state administrative regulations, county ordinances, and city ordinances all overrule that particular structure. Okay. Now, the U.S. Constitution is the highest law of the United States. Everything else must comply with it. It was created by the Constitutional Convention in 1787. It was approved by ratification by 9 of the 13 states originally. Amendments required 2/3 of both House of Congress or a convention called by 2/3 of the states, and ratification by 3/4 of the states. Jurisdiction, it's the entire United States. Examples: First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, the Due Process Clause, and Equal Protection Clause. Number 2, federal statutes. These are laws that Congress has passed. After enactment, they are organized into the United States Code. Example: the Civil Rights Act, the American with Disabilities Act, the Clean Air Act, the National Firearm Act. Who writes these? Well, members of Congress. They go through an approval process where the bill is introduced, The committee reviews it, the House passes it, the Senate passes it, and the president signs. If vetoed, Congress can override with two-thirds vote in both houses within that jurisdiction. Now, three, the United States Code. The U.S. Code is not a separate kind of law. It's an organized compilation of federal statutes by subject. Think of it in this way. Congress passes Public Law 118-25. Later, it becomes 42 USC, which is United States Code, section, those little funny wiggles means section 1983.
All right, thank you. Oh, I knew it wasn't something too awful.
Could you please mute, please? Thank you. Also, too, when we look at the U.S. Code organizes all permanent and federal statutory law into titles. Example, Title 18 equals crimes. Title 26 equals Internal Revenue Code. Title 42 equals civil rights. And Title 28 is the judiciary. Now, the important thing is to understand is Congress enacts statutes. The United States Code is codified arrangement of those statutes. And so all those codes are put in a particular order. Now, as we move forward, we have CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. This is the fourth area, as we discussed in the very beginning. Congress often passes broad laws and authorizes executive agencies to fill in the operational details through regulations. And see, this is where the Chevron case has taken away many of the abilities of the agencies that violated constitutional protection within the city, the county, and within each state. These regulations are published in the Code of Federal Regulations, known as the CFR. Example, Congress passes, OSHA shall regulate workplace safety. Then the agency issues detailed regulations covering matters such as ladder standards, exposure limits, and require safety equipment. Those regulations are compiled in the CFR. Well, who creates this CFR? Well, federal executive agencies such as the EPA, the Food and Drug Administration, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is OSHA, the Internal Revenue Service, etc. Now, the approval process to have a CFR, Congress delegates that authority by statute. Agencies draft a proposed rule. Now, when they draft this proposed rule, it has to be in line with the state constitution, the United States Constitution, U.S. codes, etc. That way, it has the ability not to affect codes and constitutions that override all of the CFR regulations. Has to have a public notice and comment. An agency reviews these comments. And so when an agency reviews the comments, it doesn't necessarily always go by what is right and so forth. So sometimes you even have to FOIA request the comments of the agency that has been utilizing these comments. So that way you know exactly what's been said, what the comments are, who's challenged, things of this nature. Then they go ahead and then there's a final rule published, and then it's incorporated into the CFR, which creates that jurisdiction. Now, the Federal Register is the government's daily publication for regulatory actions, and it includes the proposed rules, the final rules, the presidential documents, agency notices, and think of it as a daily legal newspaper. After a rule becomes final, they are incorporated into the CFR. And so it's very important if you have any questions dealing with the CFR, then you can go to that Federal Register to make sure that it has followed the guidelines necessary to actually become part of the Federal Register and the CFR procedures. Executive orders. Executive orders are directives issued by the president to manage the executive branch, okay? They cannot create new statutes. They cannot contradict, in other words, go against federal law. and cannot violate the Constitution. Approval, the president signs the order. Can it be overturned? Yes, Congress can through legislation where constitutionally it's permissible to overturn certain areas if it's in violation of the Constitution. And as all of you know, that President Trump has gone through many legal processes within this area of executive orders, having to go through the court systems, let it be local, federal, district, Supreme Court, and has won pretty much almost every aspect of his executive orders. Now, a later president can come in and change that. And that's what Trump has done with many of the Obama orders, the Clinton orders, the Bush orders, things of this nature. Now, when we look at judicial decisions within this, the courts interpret the Constitution, the statutes, the regulations. Now, these interpretations become precedent. In other words, what we would refer to as case precedent. The federal hierarchy is the U.S. District Courts, the U.S. Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court. And so when you go through the system, like we did with the case there in Naples, Florida, dealing with the pride parades, we entered it into the district court. We lost. It went into the Court of Appeals where we won, creating that case precedent. Now, if it would have went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, then it would have definitely been a stronger case within the aspect of determining the rights of individuals to utilize nudity as free speech when children were present. And so, due to the fact that it was won in the Court of Appeals, that within itself allows a form of case precedent. The approval. There's no legislative approval. Judges issue opinions after deciding cases. And again, the jurisdiction depends on the court's authority. Now, state constitutions. Every state has its own constitution. They cannot conflict with the U.S. Constitution, but may provide greater protections. As example, a state constitution may provide broader free speech or privacy rights than the federal constitution. Here in South Carolina, we've had numerous changes to the original Constitution, and many states have done that within the aspect of free speech, property rights, things of this nature, Second Amendment rights, all these areas that have been brought forth. Now, within state statute, these laws are enacted by the state legislator, and they go through an approval process where the bill is introduced, the state house passes that bill. It moves into the state Senate, which passes. And then again, the governor signs or vetoes it where it's allowed. And there are examples within that areas of bills introduced. We have criminal law, property law, family law, and licensing laws. Now, these generally apply only within that state, okay? Within those state statutes. Now, 10, the administrative regulations within the state. State agencies issue regulations under the authority granted by the state legislator. Examples, health regulations, environmental regulations, professional licensing rules. The process resembles the federal notice and comment rulemaking model through procedures which vary by state. Now, the state administrative regulations are an area that you really have to dive into. For instance, when we look at health regulations, let's take example the COVID situation. A lot of these areas here are given to state administrators who have not been elected, who have forced health regulations that violate your religious rights, your freedom to choose, and etc. The same within the environmental regulations, same within professional licensing and rules. So again, we have to be able to determine within our own self how these regulations apply to our health, to our environment, and to the professional area that we are working within. Now, when we look at county ordinances, and again, ordinances are all commercial, they're generating revenue. Counties are a political subdivision of the state. They possess only the powers granted by state law. County governing bodies may include a county commission. Okay. Here in South Carolina, we call them a county council. Board of Supervisors, a county council. Titles vary by state. Within that approval, typically a proposal is brought forth, a public meeting or a hearing. There's a vote by the county governing body. And then there has to be a publication. Okay. If it's not publicized, then it violates the particular area of approval. Okay. So if you've had issues within your community where they are doing things that are questionable and it passed through the governing body, was there officially a publication announcing this area of approval within the community? Okay. Example, zoning, noise restrictions, building regulations, animal control. And here in Colorado, there's some questions dealing with local taxes or fees. Okay. Now, within the jurisdiction, unincorporated areas of the county, and in some cases countywide, depending on the state law and the subject matter. Again, what's being taken place, what's being utilized within that community. City ordinances derive their authority from state law or state constitution in some home rule states. Here in South Carolina, we do have some areas within that aspect of home rule. They adopt ordinances governing local affairs. They're approved by the city council or an equivalent governing body. It's often signed or approved by a mayor, depending on the city's charter. Example, parking rules, local zoning, business licenses, curfews, property maintenance standards, jurisdiction within the municipality's boundaries. Now remember, the municipality is one that's supposed to protect your constitutional rights as well as working in the commercial incorporated structure. But since 1967, all municipal boundaries have been fully commercialized, okay? So the constitutional aspect no longer exists due to your all cap name or the city's name in all caps, the county's name in all caps, or the state's name in all caps. The policies differ from law. Like there are sometimes you might be in a court and let's say you want to go ahead and video, and they're like, well, it's against our policy. Okay. Well, a policy is an internal rule adopted by a government agency or an organization to guide its operations. Example, police department use of force policies, school district attendance policies, agency employee manuals. Okay. Within every structure of government, there must be an employee manual. Policies generally cannot create crimes or impose obligations to the public beyond what higher law authorizes. And these are approved by agency leadership or governing bodies, and the jurisdiction is usually limited to that agency or organization. Now, this is how it flows. The U.S. Constitution, then it comes to the federal statutes, acts of Congress, federal regulations, the CFR, federal agency policies, and the U.S. Constitution, state constitution, state statutes, state regulations, county ordinances, city ordinances, and agency policies. No lower level may conflict with a higher one. For example, a city ordinance cannot conflict with state law. Okay. So when we look at the Constitution, it's the fundamental governing law, and the people through ratification created it. A statute is a law enacted by a legislative, Congress, or state legislature. The U.S. Code is organized compilation of the federal statutes. The Office of Law Revision Councils codifies and enacts the laws. And it's very important to take this time to recognize that if there's a law on the books and it hasn't been codified and enacted correctly, then the law does not actually have any standing within the court systems. Now, the question is, will the judges obey the Constitution, the statute of Congress and state legislators and how it's supposed to be involved, as well as the federal statutes? Now, the CFR is the compilation of the federal regulations, okay? And so federal agencies acting under their delegated authority. Now, sometimes these agencies want to step outside of their delegated authority, and we, the people, must place them back in check. The Federal Register, that's the daily publication that we talked about. Ordinances, it's a local law, it's a county or municipal governing body that creates it. The regulation, rule implementing a statute, is the administrative agency. Policy, internal guidance or operational rule. The government agency or the organization creates this policy. Back to case law, it's judicial interpretation of law. Only the courts can interpret, okay? Where again, with the old Chevron case law, the courts were not doing the interpretation, and agency rule makers were actually doing the interpretation for the courts. And again, this framework reflects the principle of federalism in the United States. The federal government has limited areas of powers, okay? So when we look at these areas, we have to take into consideration all these aspects of truth. Okay. When we look at the Constitution, we kind of have to take into consideration what was done within how it was determined and what it was meant. Okay. Just like we're going through the aspect of being born in the United States if you are a citizen. Okay. Well, the original perspective of that was if your parents, one of them was a citizen of the United States already, and you were born here, then you automatically became within that aspect of a citizen. But if your parents aren't citizen and you're born here, you were never meant to be a citizen. Just like the Constitution was never meant to give protected rights to people who were not citizens or people who were born here in our country. Okay. So again, you have to take a look at the perspective. There is no universal accepted list of unconstitutional laws. Even judges and scholars who identify as originalists often disagree. That said, several categories of modern laws and regulations are commonly criticized by true constitutional people because it exceeds the powers granted by the Constitution or infringing on individual rights. Again, if it's not in the Constitution and it doesn't spell out the rights, government cannot usurp those rights according to those of us who believe the Constitution is and has been declared the supreme law of the land. Now, the expansion of the federal regulatory power, okay? We tend to argue that Congress has interpreted the Commerce Clause much more broadly than the framers intended, allowing regulation of activities that are primarily local rather than interstate. That's where the all commercial name comes into effect, okay? Again, when you see your name in all capital letters, it basically is defined as all letters of the English alphabet only include uppercase letters. There's no distinction between typeface or font that will be recognized. And again, that's in most Administrative Procedures Act throughout every state within our union. And again, we criticize in the aspect of regulations affecting agricultural, labor, land use, and environmental matters. Now, do we truly own our land? If we're paying taxes, how do we own our land? If we own our automobile and we're paying taxes on our automobile, do we really own our automobile? These are areas where the Commerce Clause has been widened and misinterpreted when it goes against the constitutional rights that we have. Administrative agencies. Some argue that federal agencies exercise legislative, executive, and judicial powers simultaneously, raising concerns under the Constitution's separation of powers. And again, examples often discussed include agencies that issue regulations, enforce them, adjudicate disputes internally. And all this here was basically torn away when the Chevron case ruling came out, stating that no longer can administrative agencies determine the law as the law was originally written. Firearm regulations. This is an important area dealing with the Second Amendment. You know, we tend to argue that certain federal, state, and local gun restrictions could conflict with the Second Amendment's original public meaning. Others disagree, and where constitutional limits should be drawn. Okay. Now, there's been a wide push around the United States dealing with people who have been incarcerated on a felony charge, even though their felony charge did not include a firearm. And so in some states, these felony charges, along with in a federal situation, have been withdrawn, allowing them to hold handguns and other areas due to the Second Amendment's original meaning. Speech restrictions. Laws regulating political speech, compelled speech, or certain forms of expression are often challenged under the original understanding of the First Amendment. Now, let's take a look at this political speech, okay? If you are a nonprofit and you are a 501c3, you lose your nonprofit status if you create political speech. Now, why would that be if we are meant to have free speech? The reason is simply because they're in the wrong aspect of jurisdiction. Where a 501c3, you're unable to speak within the political arena. A 508 allows you to speak in the political arena without violating the ability of the government coming back in and taking away your nonprofit status. Now, again, where is the aspect of compelled speech in certain forms? Some states, some counties, some cities have a speech area. If you're going to go ahead and have a area where you're going to challenge the situation that is going on, they create an area where only you can talk from, which again is a violation of the First Amendment. The auditors around the country, the First Amendment auditors, go and they go on the sidewalks where it's public. And anything you can see from public view, you're able to record according to Supreme Court rulings. Now, you can't go into businesses, but if you are taking video through their windows and looking into the business, there's nothing they can do. Again, people have to understand where the area of First Amendment rights are, the ability between public versus private, and at the same time able to understand that we have the ability to speak our peace of mind within this country. Now, this is an area that is really starting to get some heat. It's called civil asset forfeiture. And this is where government, if you're driving down the highway and let's say, like myself, and let's say I was going to go buy an antique car, okay? And let's say I had $10,000 cash and an ounce of gold. And I had made a plan with the gentleman I'm buying this 1948 Buick Seatonette two-door car that has a brand new motor sitting on a new suspension, all these type of things. And I'm driving down the road and I get pulled over for, let's say, I didn't use my turn signal on the highway or on the road as I was passing a car. And they look in and they see a little briefcase there and they're like, well, what's in that briefcase? And I'm like, well, it's private and doesn't, has nothing to do with what the stop is about. And pretty soon, the next thing you know, they're pulling you out of the car, violating your Fourth Amendment rights, search and seizure, and they open that up, and there's all this money in there, along with this ounce of gold. Well, they confiscate that, and now you have to prove that you, the individual who had this money, this gold, by legal and lawful means. Okay. And so they take it. And even though you go to court and even though you file paperwork, the process is a long legal process that a lot of people are deterred. And so they don't even like try to fight and get their money back because they would spend more money in some cases to an attorney or other areas. So again, why are we allowing civil and asset forfeiture? Okay. When there is not a criminal conviction. In other words, you're guilty and you have to prove your innocence versus you're innocent, as the Constitution says, and then prove you're guilty by appears within that jury. Okay. Warrantless surveillance. When we look at warrantless surveillance, let's take flock cameras. These are cameras that are put on telephone poles all over your city, your county, within the state, monitoring your travel on the public roads, monitoring your walking on the sidewalk, monitoring every aspect of your life out in the public. Now, in some areas, we believe that the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures are being ran over within this warrantless surveillance with these flock cameras. Okay. So a lot of cities and states and within the states and overseas especially, there's a big protest and they're, waking up and they're finding their flock cameras destroyed or taken down. Well, this is because people believe that they are being watched, surveilled without any protection of their own personable rights of where they are moving and going to and from. Eminent domain and property rights. Some argue that abroad, interpretations of public use under the Fifth Amendment exceed the original meaning of that phrase. Again, if the county or the city really want your property, they're going to do everything they can within eminent domain and take your property. Now, are they going to give you fair market value? Normally, they don't. Because again, they want to go ahead and create a legal situation which will cost you revenue, and most people can't fight it, okay? Because they don't have the ability financially to do so. Now, under trust law, you can go ahead and protect your rights within that aspect of eminent domain. And that's another area that we'll go into later. Delegation of legislative authority. Okay. Congress has delegated too much law-making authority to executive agencies, contrary to Article 1, vesting legislative power to Congress. In other words, Congress has taken their ability and given their ability and rights and how it was created, given it to unelected individuals to determine how we live, how we spend our money, how we see doctors, the food we eat, things of this area. So again, we have to understand as we're moving through this decade of change, all this is going to be brought up. Everything that I'm talking about in this talk this evening are going to be looked at during this time frame. And so when it comes up, you can understand what is taking place within our government and the changes that are going to be making. Federal criminal law. Some contend that Congress has criminalized conduct beyond the limited powers specifically granted to the federal government, leaving matters that should belong to the states. Now, federal criminal law. Okay, so we're going to go to Title 4, Section 112 of U.S. Code. That is presumption. It was brought forth in 1934, and that allowed the government to determine that you might commit a crime, and because we think you might do it, we're going to arrest you and throw you in jail, or we're going to confiscate your property, or we're going to do something to the effect that takes away your fundamental rights as a living man or woman, son or daughter. These are things that we have to take into consideration as these federal laws, regulations, statutes, ordinances, all these areas are slowly going to be moving into a different program where there has to be some form of an inter-party, that we do actually own our property without government interference, without inappropriate taxation, things of this nature. The U.S. legal system is often described as a common law system, but it's actually a combination of several legal traditions. The 5 categories you listed are the major sources of law that interact with each other. And those were the 5 categories that we talked about earlier. Constitutional law is the foundation and limits of government power. Statutory law are rules created by elected legislators. Administrative law, detailed rules created by government agencies under legislative authority. Common law are the principles developed by judges through cases. Equity, fairness-based remedy courts used when ordinary legal remedies are inadequate. Equity is where you want to be in any form of a court case. And through subrogation, that is where you separate your all cap name from your lawful name in upper and lower case, and you challenge within those jurisdictional principles. And again, that's the way you want to go if you have to go into court, is through equity. One, English common law. Court decisions, precedent, judicial reasoning. What is it? English common law. We hear this all the time. I'm under common law. But really, what is common law? English common law is a legal tradition where judges develop legal principles by deciding disputes. The reasoning used in earlier cases becomes their guidance, or sometimes their binding authority. In other words, case precedents. That's what we're talking about. If you have laws that have already been determined, the reason for why it's developed, the challenges, the areas there, you can utilize that to determine the future within almost every case. It's developed in England.
Developed in England.
And again, please mute.
Please mute.
If developed in England, please mute. If developed in England after the Norman conquest in 1066, when royal judges traveled throughout England applying consistent rules rather than relying only in local customs, the word common meant common throughout the kingdom. In other words, common sense, common throughout the kingdom. Now, stare decisis is again the doctrine of precedent, the case precedent. So similar cases can be decided similarly. A court deciding a case looks at past decisions, the legal principles used in those decisions, whether the current facts are similar enough to apply those principles. Now, a state Supreme Court decides a police officer must obtain a warrant before searching a person's home unless an exception applies. Years later, another case involves a similar search, and the lower courts generally follow the earlier decision. Okay, so let's take this into consideration. You're at home, you have somebody visiting your home, and let's say they have a warrant on them, and you don't know this, okay? Maybe they didn't go to a speeding ticket hearing or whatever the case may be, but they put out a bench warrant. And the police officer comes to your door and knocks on your door and says, "Hey, is so-and-so here?" And you're like, "Well, yeah, they're here." And they're like, "Well, we got a warrant to arrest this individual, so we need to come into your house." And you're like, "Well, do you have a search warrant with you?" And they're like, "Well, no, but we have a warrant." And you're like, "Well, I'd like to see the warrant." And they're like, "Well, you don't have to see the warrant. We got a warrant." And they just bust through your house. They have guns pointed on you, your husband, your children. They go get the individual and they take him out. Is that a violation of your rights? Well, it is, because under case law, they have to give you a warrant because that individual is a third party. They do not live in your home. Okay. So if they do not live in your home, their warrant for arrest is not applicable to your house. It's only applicable to where they live. Okay. So these are things that we have to understand within case law. Now, judicial reasoning often involves, what's the legal principle applying to this situation? Is there a contract dispute, property dispute? Is there a personal injury claim? What are we looking at? Are we looking at similar facts? Did higher courts already decide this issue? Is there a distinction? How do we apply these facts? Is there a rule? Is there a person who creates unreasonable danger may be liable for resulting injuries? Facts: a store leaves a wet flooring mark if someone slips. Okay. Did they take care of it? Did they forget to put out the, slippery sign, walk carefully, whatever the case may be? These are all things there that are relevant within that case. Okay, binding precedent. The lower court must follow a higher court's decision. And this is where we look at the aspect of city courts and county courts have to follow a higher court's decision. A lot of judges don't like that because a lot of judges within those areas of city and county, and even in some aspects of state courts, feel that they are the last road and they will override anything they choose to due to the fact that they are egotistical, due to the fact that they are liberal, due to the fact that they are woke, due to all these areas. And so we are able to move forward in that direction. And so within that area of persuasive precedent, a court may consider it but doesn't have to follow it. Okay. Decisions from other states, decisions from foreign courts, legal writing. Again, it's determined by that individual judge, but at the same time, you do have the ability to move forward within the area of challenging it through the appeal process. And that's normally where you're going to find your remedy anyhow. Okay. Common law remains especially important in areas such as contracts, property torts, criminal procedures, evidence, areas of this nature. Okay. Historically, common law is defined through many crimes today. Legislations usually define crimes through criminal codes. Okay. So when we look at this, I'm going to kind of sneak out of that for a sec and come back to where we're at within the aspect of who we are, things of this nature. And remember that we have to have that ability to recognize all these different jurisdictions. Okay. How many of you have even heard of some of these different jurisdictions? Probably most of you haven't. And that's where we have to take into consideration where we are, what we're doing, how are we affected, things of this nature. Okay. So as we move forward within this aspect here, we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to kind of run through this. We have statutory law, which we've talked about. We talk about how Congress creates federal statutes, how state legislators create statutes, how city councils create statutes, all these areas within life. And so we need to be able to take into consideration what we are doing within this aspect and being able to move forward to be able to protect not only ourselves, but our family, our community, our sons and daughters, our legacy, our property, all this aspects of who we are as fundamental people created in God's image. Okay. Now, when we look at it from the aspect of constitutional law, okay, we have to understand the Constitution establishes the structure of government. We are a republic form of government. The powers of the government are within 17 areas that are within the federal constitution, okay, as well as the non-federal constitution, because actually we actually are operating under two forms of constitutions. We have the original organic constitution prior to 1871 and the commercial constitution after 1871. Okay. So remember, the state law cannot override the U.S. Constitution. Okay. A court can determine or may determine the law if it violates any of the aspects within the Constitution and strike it down. Okay, so again, we have to be able to recognize legislation makes laws, executive power enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. Okay. Some of the main areas that we're looking at today is immigration, national defense, and currency. And those are the three major areas that we're going to see some of the biggest changes in our country: immigration, national defense, being a true sovereign nation of the Western Hemisphere, the Americas. currency, true asset-backed financial money, no longer fiat currency of credit debit. Okay. Another area that we're going to be looking into probably too as we move forward is marriage laws. You know, how does that affect the communities, property laws? How does that affect the communities? And criminal law, which areas need to be addressed? Okay. We also have to be able to remember we have to protect our speech, our religion, our due process, our equal protection, and our protection from unreasonable searches. These are all areas established under Marbury versus Madison, which gave us the Supreme Court, which determined whether the government agencies violated the Constitution and came out to say that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not of the water. Big difference, people. Water is admiralty, commercial. Okay. And that's where we're moving away from. And that is what Trump is initiating as we move through this decade. Okay. Equity principles are also going to be developed. We're going to be having more areas awarded within money damages. Trump said, you know, class action lawsuits are the way to stop what is going on. Well, all this is going to come through as things progress through in this decade. When we look at it from the aspect of damages, the insurance companies are not going to be in the same situation they are today, where we have attorneys just jumping on every, crazy case, getting crazy money, but yet the damages did not exceed or that type of money, but yet they're being awarded that type of money. So everything's going to be kind of more balanced. There's going to be injunctions put in, which is a court order that stops someone from an action. There's going to be, areas addressed dealing with illegal dumping of chemicals. All these things are going to be coming out within this decade. And we're going to see changes, not just within Monsanto, but all these other forms of companies. Okay, so we have to be able to cancel the contract. The contract is that we are not in a contract that we're unaware of, like our driver's license contract, our birth certificate contract, all these areas. These things are going to be challenged and changed, and there's going to be some form of rescission done to these areas. Now, when we look at the fiduciary duties of equity, okay, we're going to be learning and teaching more about trustees, corporate directors, guardians, this person's special responsibility to, take care of certain property, certain areas for the beneficiary. And right now, the court systems think they are the beneficiary and you are just the defendant, when in reality, you're the beneficiary. And so we have to understand the process within these courts as we move forward through subrogation. Again, excluding your all cap name and addressing the court within the private structure versus the public. We have to look at the administrative law, how it governs these agencies and what regulations enforce laws, and how and if they violate the Constitution, the state laws, or the federal laws. Okay. Because again, agencies, because they cannot write every technical rule, doesn't mean that they're not going to try. Okay. We're going to be also looking at a lot of changes with the aspect of environmental protection as things move forward. We're going to be looking at air pollution. We're going to be looking at, different procedures dealing with water, and all these things are going to be taking place. And so these are things that local communities can look at and change, just like they can take the fluoride out of the water, out of the public system. They can challenge the 5G, 6G towers. They can do all these things. It just takes a small group of people willing to do the time, okay? Willing to make the time. And that will include and prevent lower environmental standards. It'll take care of workplace safety rules. It'll take care of food and safety requirements and regulations. And it also have the ability for enforcement, okay? And so we'll be able to adjudicate, we'll be able to resolve these disputes, through hearings and through, challenges of every aspect of our life and how they're affected through these commercial areas, okay? Now, when we look at the agencies, they just can't create any kind of rule that they want. They can't say, okay, we're not going to allow you to film here today. They can't do that. Okay. They don't have that authority from statute. They have to follow certain procedures. They have to respect their constitutional rights, and this is where I challenged the states in every state we've lived in this aspect of agencies. Okay. Just like when I asked the governor, where is the constitutional authority in the federal constitution, the United States Constitution, the state constitution, in statutes, CFRs, things of this nature that allow you to convert my true name of upper and lowercase to an all capital commercial structure entity? Okay. They do not want people to know this. Okay. And as we move forward in this decade, all this is being brought forth, and all of you have to take into consideration what is your part. Okay. How far do I want to go? And I'm going to just be honest here, okay? This might piss some people off and it might not. A lot of people see the change. They want to become part of the change, but they're not willing to do the work to protect the change. Okay. So in some cases, people want to be, let's say, a national, but they always question, what is a national? What do I get out of it? Okay. Well, you're not a citizen. You're not in that same category of jurisdiction. That's the biggest thing. You're not in that aspect of under the thumb of rules and regulations. But yet, what's a national? We go over things over and over and over, explaining what's taking place, and yet people sometimes still think they want to be a national, but they don't want to do the work to become a national. And I'm okay with that. But just to be honest, you're wasting your time. Okay. My time I'm giving freely. That's what I've chosen to do. But all you're doing is wasting your time because you don't want to do the steps. You don't want to do the research. You don't want to take time to look it up yourself. And that's where the difference is between responsibility and entitlement come in. Okay. So we have to understand that we have to take the opportunity, if we want to do something, to do it, not because everybody else is going to do it, but because you choose to do it, to follow through, to find the determination to stand on your own 2 feet and to understand the aspect of what a true free nature being that God created is supposed to be. Many, over the years that I've been teaching, 40 plus, want all the knowledge and want all the information, but then they keep coming back and they say, well, what do I get out of it? Apparently, you're not getting anything out of it, so why are you wasting your time? Okay. So we have to have the ability to interact. We have to have the ability to recognize the Constitution, which allows government to regulate commerce and to protect due process. We have to have the ability to understand the statutes and how they are passed, and are they creating a safety workplace, or are they creating safety to protect us from injury? We have to look at the administrative law. We have to look at, is it detailed? Are there safety regulations? Is there some form that violates the Constitution? Is there a common law aspect where we sue for negligence based on judicial precedent, or are we just suing because we can sue? Okay, right now, Anybody can sue anybody. Doesn't mean they're going to win, but you can sue. Okay. That's the way it is. The courts are no longer working in an injured area. Okay. Equity, a court issues an injunction. Okay. We have to understand what equity is, who's in control of equity versus they're determining who is in control of equity. When I say they're, the courts. Okay. Again, just an overview. The hierarchy of authority, the U.S. system, U.S. Constitution, number one. Number two, federal statutes and treaties. Number three, federal regulations. Number four, state constitutions. Number five, state statutes. Number six, state regulations. Number seven, common law judicial decisions. Number eight, local ordinances in the city and the county. That's the hierarchy of the system. Okay. So, in short, common law asks, what have the courts decided before? That's pretty simple. Statutory law asks, what rules did elected lawmakers create? Key phrase, rules. Constitutional law asks, what powers and rights are fundamental? Equity asks, what remedy is fair when ordinary law is insufficient? Administrative law asks, how do agencies implement the laws they are given? And so today, everything that I've shared is the framework of the modern U.S. legal system. So again, ninth-amendment-party.com, in God we trust. And that is the fundamental aspects of where we are according to jurisdiction and laws. So I hope that helped. I hoped everybody is understanding where we're at. No, you weren't supposed to be seeing anything, Bonnie. If I wanted to see it, I would have shared it. And so again, I'm just going through what aspects of laws are. Okay. This will be also, like I said, on Rumble. It'll also be on YouTube. And the PDF file that I utilized will be on the ninth-amendment-party.com. And it's on the first page right now. If you go to it, scroll down, very bottom of it, you're going to see the hierarchy of laws. Click on that, PDF file will pop on up, and everything that I've covered, everything that I've said is on that PDF file for you, the real man, real woman, to be able to look at when you have a question. You don't have to call me, okay? You have it there. And that's the whole purpose of me giving all these lessons for this last year, is giving you the tools so you can do your research. Okay. Just like this person over here, you don't see anything here, but you see something on the other side. Okay. You see Christ right there. Okay. He gave you the tools. Okay. He gave you the Bible. He gave you all these aspects. Okay. I'm giving you the tools with all these books, all the knowledge. Okay. If you don't look at them and you don't read them and you don't follow through, you're not getting any tools. Okay. You got to become the tool. Change is not change without change. And this weekend, I'll be on the Charlie Ward Show, and we'll be discussing all sorts of positive things going on within our country and with the things that are happening overseas. And so, those of you who are part of the Insiders Club, I look forward to having you check us out on Saturday. And those of you who aren't, I'll see if we can get a link somewhere. Normally, he'll post the Insiders Club stuff on YouTube or Rumble later on, not immediately, but once he does that, we'll get that link out to all of you as well. Any questions? It's 8:36. I think we got maybe about 5 minutes worth of questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and make it quick, and we'll ask Alicia. Do you have any questions? Okay. Miss Paula, I think you can't ask any questions, but I appreciate you tuning in. I'll check my chat just to make sure that there's Each of those, let's see, will each person need to go through the same process to get out from under the maritime laws, or will there be a sweeping changes during this decade that sets the whole country free from? Lydia, I believe there will be a form of it. But again, the process itself isn't just to protect you. But again, we're going to be running two forms of government for quite a while, I think. Those people who are within states that do not want to change, because again, states do have some form of sovereignty. And so, we're going to be seeing something, I would believe. But at the same time, it's just personal responsibility. I mean, if you want to do it, you do it. If want to just kind of not do it, you don't do it. And hey, it doesn't affect me. Okay, just so you know, it's not going to change my life or affect my life one bit, but it will affect yours. That I know. Okay. So hopefully that answers your question there. Uh, let's see here. Mr. Hamp, is Mr. Hamp still on? Do you have any questions, Mr. Hamp? Okay. All right, people, it's 8:40. We're going to go ahead and call it a night. Again, I appreciate each and every one of you being on there. And again, thanks again for tuning in, and God bless, and let's make America great again. Thank you now. Good night.